All right, let's dive into a world that's invisible to us, but totally essential. The world of cells.
Yeah. And get ready for like a personal biology lesson.
Exactly. We'll unpack your notes, explore how these tiny things work, and uncover some cool facts.
We'll break down those complex terms, hit the must-know info, and even add some surprises.
Okay, so let's start basic. Your notes mention two main types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic.
Right.
I remember struggling with those back in school. What's the difference?
So prokaryotic cells are like the studio apartments of the cell world,
Okay.
simpler, smaller, compact.
Uh-huh.
They're in things like bacteria, and their key thing is they don't have a true nucleus.
Okay.
The DNA just kind of hangs out in the cytoplasm.
Got it. So no separate room for the DNA.
Right.
What about eukaryotic cells then?
Eukaryotic cells are like sprawling mansions,
Ooh, fancy.
larger, more complex, and with specialized compartments. These are the cells making up plants, animals, fungi, and protists. They have a membrane-bound nucleus that holds their DNA and all these other structures called organelles.
Organelles.
Wow.
They always sounded so futuristic.
First.
What are they? What do they do?
Imagine a eukaryotic cell like a bustling city, right?
Yeah,
Each organelle is like a specialized department,
I like that.
all working to keep the city running. You've got the nucleus acting as city hall, controlling everything. Then ribosomes, the factories churning out proteins, the building blocks of life. And mitochondria. Those are the powerhouses, providing energy.
Wow, a cell is a miniature city. That makes those textbook diagrams make more sense.
Totally. And each organelle has its own structure and function,
Okay.
perfectly adapted to its role. For example, the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, is like a network of highways and factories.
The ER, I remember those images from my textbook.
Yeah.
All those folded membranes.
Yeah. It transports and processes proteins.
What exactly goes on in there?
So there are two types. Rough ER and smooth ER. The rough ER, it gets its name from the ribosomes on its surface. It's involved in protein synthesis and modification, like the assembly line where proteins are built and checked for quality.
So the ribosomes are like the workers on the assembly line, building those proteins.
Exactly. And once those proteins are put together, they often need more processing and packaging.
And that's where the Golgi apparatus comes in.
You got it.
Another one of those complex names.
Right. But think of it like the post office or shipping center.
Okay.
It gets proteins from the ER, sorts them, modifies them, and packages them into vesicles. Those are like little sacks that transport stuff.
So a complex sorting and distribution system, making
Wow.
sure the proteins get where they need to go.
Exactly. It's a great example of how intricate and efficient a cell is.
All this talk about proteins and transport systems, these tiny cells are busy.
They are nonstop, 24/7, and we haven't even gotten to lysosomes yet.
Lysosomes.
Yeah, they're like the recycling center. They break down waste and worn out cell parts,
Right.
like the garbage collectors and recycling plants.
Perfect analogy.
Then there are vacuoles, those big storage sacks you find in plants.
Right.
They can hold water, nutrients, and even pigments that give flowers their color.
It's amazing how much diversity there is in these tiny cells.
It really is. And remember, all these organelles, the nucleus, ribosomes, Golgi, they work together to keep the cell alive and well. It's like biological engineering.
I'm really starting to see cells in a new light now.
Yeah.
They're not just these basic units of life,
Yeah.
but intricate dynamic systems that are always at work.
Exactly. And we've only scratched the surface. We still need to talk about mitochondria and chloroplasts, the energy centers.
Mitochondria and chloroplasts.
Yeah.
Those were big in my biology class. I'm ready for that, but can we recap what we've learned so far?
Sure. Let's go for the basics before we get to those energy centers.
Sounds good.
So we've got prokaryotic cells. Those are the simple ones without a nucleus. And then eukaryotic cells, which are more complex with their nucleus and organelles.
Like the mansion with all the different rooms.
Exactly. And within those eukaryotic cells, we looked at the nucleus, the ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus.
It's wild how much is happening inside these cells.
It is like a whole city in there.
Okay, so now let's talk about those powerhouses. Mitochondria and chloroplasts.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got those prokaryotic cells, the simple ones, and eukaryotic cells, the mansions.
Right, with all the different rooms for all the different functions.
Yeah. And in those eukaryotic cells, we've got the nucleus, the ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus.
So much going on.
It is. It's like its own little city bustling with activity.
Okay, so now let's get to the powerhouses of the cell.
Yes. Mitochondria and chloroplasts.
Mitochondria, the powerhouses.
Mhm.
I remember that from way back.
Right. So what makes them so powerful? Well, they're like the energy factories of the cell.
Okay.
They take in fuel like glucose,
Uh-huh.
and through cellular respiration, they turn it into usable energy.
And that's ATP, right?
It's like the energy currency for cells.
Oh, I like that.
Powers everything from muscle contractions to nerve impulses.
So mitochondria are like the batteries keeping our cells going.
That's a great way to think about it. And you know what's really interesting?
What's that?
Mitochondria have their own DNA.
Really?
Separate from the DNA in the nucleus.
Yeah.
Scientists think that mitochondria were once their own bacteria.
Whoa.
Like way back billions of years ago, they were engulfed by eukaryotic cells.
So they're just hanging out on their own.
Yeah, and then they formed this symbiotic relationship.
So the mitochondria got protection and the cell got energy.
Exactly. It's pretty wild.
Mitochondria are way more interesting than I remember.
They are. Okay, so now what about chloroplasts?
Chloroplasts, yeah, those are only in plants, right?
Yep, they're the energy factories for plant cells,
Uh-huh.
responsible for photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis is the process of turning sunlight into energy.
Exactly. Turning sunlight into glucose.
So like food for the plant.
Yeah, you can think of chloroplasts like solar panels,
Oh, that makes sense.
capturing that sunlight and making food.
And chloroplasts also have their own DNA.
Yep. They're also thought to have come from ancient bacteria.
It's incredible how these tiny organelles have such a long history.
I know. And they're still so crucial for life today.
But how do they actually do all this energy conversion? It seems so complicated.
So both mitochondria and chloroplasts, they have special structures inside,
Okay.
perfect for their job.
Okay.
Mitochondria have a double membrane,
Uh-huh.
and the inner one is folded into these things called cristae.
Cristae?
Yeah, they increase the surface area for cellular respiration.
More space to make energy.
Exactly. And chloroplasts have their own internal membranes too,
Oh, right.
called thylakoids.
Okay.
They're stacked up to form grana.
Grata,
Yep. And those thylakoid membranes have chlorophyll.
the pigment that absorbs light.
Right. And that's where the light-dependent reactions happen.
So both mitochondria and chloroplasts are super efficient at what they do.
They are.
Are there any other organelles that deal with energy?
Well, mitochondria and chloroplasts are the main ones.
Yeah.
But others help out, like peroxisomes.
Peroxisomes, what do they do?
They're like little membrane-bound sacs,
Okay.
and they have enzymes for different reactions,
Uh-huh.
including breaking down fatty acids.
And those can be used to make energy.
Exactly. By the mitochondria.
So like helper power generators.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then there's the cytoskeleton.
Oh, the cytoskeleton. We haven't talked about that yet.
So the cytoskeleton, it's like a network of protein fibers.
Right. It gives the cell its shape,
Yes, it does. And it helps move organelles around.
like the mitochondria and chloroplasts.
Yep.
To where they're needed.
The cytoskeleton's like the roads and infrastructure of the cell.
Exactly. It's what keeps everything organized and running smoothly.
Wow. We've covered so much today, from the types of cells to how they make energy.
I know it's a lot. But cells are just so fascinating.
They are.
And we're just getting started.
I know there's so much more to learn. There is. But before we keep going, let's quickly recap mitochondria and chloroplasts.
Yeah, good idea. Let's make sure I've got all this down. All right, let's recap those powerhouses one last time.
Okay.
Mitochondria and chloroplasts.
So mitochondria, they're like the energy providers.
Right.
They're in pretty much every eukaryotic cell.
Plants, animals, all that.
Yep. And they turn the food we eat into that usable energy.
ATP.
ATP, our cellular currency.
And don't forget they have their own DNA.
Right. Separate from the nucleus. Super interesting.
Like tiny power plants in every cell.
Exactly. Now, chloroplasts
Chloroplasts, those are just in plants, right?
and algae.
And algae.
They capture that light energy from the sun.
Yeah.
And through photosynthesis, they turn it into glucose.
Plant food.
Exactly.
And the chloroplasts, they have their own DNA too.
Right? They do.
It's amazing how these tiny things are so important for life.
It really is. It shows how connected everything is.
So we've talked about how cells work, but how do scientists actually study them?
Ah, good question.
You mentioned microscopes before,
Yeah, so for a basic look at cells, scientists use light microscopes.
like the ones we used in school.
Exactly. Light and lenses to magnify things.
I remember looking at onion skin under one of those.
But to see the details within cells like the organelles, you need something stronger.
Okay.
Electron
What's
microscopes.
different about them?
They use beams of electrons instead of light.
Okay.
Electrons have a much shorter wavelength, so you get way better magnification.
So electron microscopes are like super high powered.
Yeah. And there are two main types,
Oh.
transmission electron microscopes, or TEMs,
Okay.
and scanning electron microscopes, or SEMs.
What's the difference?
So TEMs, they send electrons through a thin slice of the sample.
Okay.
You get a really detailed 2D image of the insides.
Like a cross-section.
Exactly. And SEMs scan the electrons across the surface,
Uh-huh.
so you get a 3D image of the outside.
That's so cool. So you see the inside and the outside.
Yep. It's like having different tools to explore a whole new world.
This has been so fascinating. I have a whole new appreciation for cells now.
Me too. They really are the building blocks of life.
From tiny bacteria to massive trees, it's all cells.
And we're still learning new things about them all the time.
I feel like I want to learn more now.
That's great. Keep that curiosity going and never stop exploring.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into cells.
Thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed it.